the refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, this is a paradigm. So it's like the Buddha is the knowing in the present. So it's like being born as a conscious entity in the universe. Each one of us, when we're born, is that we're operating now within a human form, a conscious entity in the universe. And this conscious entity we call ourselves, we give it a name, and we kind of create a personality around it, this entity. And therefore, when we become a person of various kinds and identify with the cultural conditioning, social conditioning that we happen to get from whatever family, whatever group we're born into. And so this is a conditioning process that we believe in, and we interpret experience through these conditions. Now, just assume that all these conditions they're coming out of not understanding the Dhamma, not knowing the truth of the way it really is. We're kind of programmed and primed through maybe the goodwill, good intentions of our own parents, and our acquiring the biases and prejudices of our own ethnic background, our own cultural group, social group, whatever. These are conditioned into the mind. Some are good, some of the conditioning is quite good, some of it isn't all that good. Some of it can be absolutely terrible. It's born into abusive family with a kind of dreadful, hateful attitudes and all that. It get conditioned through abuse, brutality, and that kind of experience also is a conditioning process. But mindfulness is getting beyond the conditioning of the mind, it is the true nature of the mind, which is the purity before other conditions arise, before you become anything. Like a baby isn't a person, it doesn't have a personality, doesn't identify itself as even a baby, or being an American, or being a male or female baby. So the mind is not conditioned yet to see itself through perceptions, and we acquire this as this sense of ourself through ignorance of the Dhamma. So now we're awakening out of that ignorance, not understanding things as they really are. And so the ability to pay attention, awaken, listen, you're actually opening again that door to the deathless and to the purity of being before you become anything. So it's a state of purity and intelligence, but it's not personal. It has no personality to it. It has no color, no gender, no quality, no quantity. So it's like light, isn't it? Light itself, it is just light, and it has no color, but it makes color possible. So the Buddha is this state of knowing, like being a conscious entity in the universe. You're actually, in terms of practical, the way it is, the practicalities of experience in the present. Each one of us is the center of the universe. And this isn't, don't let this go to your head. Because it's not based on my personality thinking I am Ajahn Sumedho, I'm the center of the universe, but in terms of experience, isn't it? Right now, even though we're all sitting in this hall, each one of us is the center of the experience. So, my voice is in your mind, isn't it? The conventional reality is I'm sitting up here and I'm speaking and you're hearing my voice, and you look at it in terms of a cultural conditioning and conventional reality. Now we're getting beyond the conventional reality, the way it appears and the way we're used to, the way everybody agrees to perceive things, into direct knowing, direct knowledge, which is the Buddha knowledge. Buddha knows the way it is. So in this way, it's important to recognize that the position of being a conscious entity born into a human body with the human karma and the sensitivity that implies in this sense realm that we live in, that the experience is that the universe impinges upon this form. The pressures, the forces of the universe contact this form, this body, these senses. Now, how you interpret that, you don't have to. You can get out of your personal interpretations of experience, which makes it all. Which can make, when you look at it personally, it's very threatening, and one feels very vulnerable and very kind of frightened by the intensity of a whole universe impinging on this rather delicate form. So in terms of getting beyond interpreting from the personality view to the Buddha view, or to the observing, contemplating directly the way it is as experience here and now. Now, it's important to be able to see that what direct knowledge, to be able, this is what you're using. It's not something, it's not a kind of ability you acquire through study of Buddhism. It's something you learn how to use. Wisdom is natural to this state. It's not something you have to get. It's something you're developing a confidence in using wisdom rather than trying to get wisdom from Buddhist texts or from Buddhist teachers or whatever. And so on the personal level, you might think, well, I don't have any wisdom. I've got to study hard and practice a lot in order to be wise, become wise, because I've made so many stupid mistakes in my life and I've got so many problems, and so I don't have any wisdom. Maybe Ajahn Sumedho has a lot of wisdom. That's the conventional reality. That's the personal interpretation, isn't it? That's personality view. So direct knowledge is knowing that assumption, I'm a person with a lot of problems, I don't have very much wisdom, I have to practice hard in order to become wise, is what? What is it in terms of the present moment? It's a condition arising, ceasing. if you determine to, and I found with this kind of practice, I deliberately think these things so that I can see them, because if you're just thinking in a kind of proliferating way about what you should be and how you're so attached to your personality, and you're attached to your children, and you're attached to your partners, and you're attached to your professions, and you've got so many attachments. This is all personality view, isn't it? This sense of I'm very attached. And yesterday, talking to a woman, she was saying how much she's attached to her grandchild. And so this idea of letting go of her grandchild. But this whole attitude of I'm attached to my grandchild is what it's personality view, isn't it? It's a conventional assumption. But in the present moment, this view can be seen, isn't it? It's a view. You can listen to yourself thinking, I'm really attached to my grandchild. There's a part listening, isn't it? And then there's this ability to think it. I am somebody who's really attached to my grandchild. And that there's the thing that the movement of the thought, but there's a listening, there's a awareness around the thought. So the direct knowledge is in the awareness, not in the proliferating habits around the thought, about that create this sense of you as a person with that is attached to your grandchild. It doesn't mean saying I'm not attached to my grandchildren. It's the same thing, whether. But I mean, in terms of direct knowledge, and just to point out what it really is, very direct, immediate, and it's where wisdom is. Learning to use wisdom. It's there for you to use. You don't have to get it, try to become wise. Just trust yourself to use it more and more. To let wisdom be your refuge. So this is what the Buddhaṃ Saranang Gacchāmi really means. Buddha, the knowing, Dhamma is the known. In that it's a conscious experience, this state of that being a conscious form. We're in the state of knowing. This is a knowing realm. Consciousness is knowing. So we think of knowing as knowing about something, having a lot of views, opinions, ideas about things. But the Buddha knowledge is direct knowing, the way it is. So I'm not trying to convince you that you shouldn't be attached to your grandchildren, or there's anything wrong with being attached, or that we're not coming from the ideal realm about how you should be. If you were an arahant and perfect, then you should be like this, should be like that. And but that's going back to the personality view. Is an arahant a kind of more refined personality? Sometimes we create arahants in the mind. They're just kind of better forms of better people than we think we are. We create an arahant as somebody who's a lot wiser, a lot more wise, more mature than we happen to be. This is all still personality view, isn't it? So the directness of this is just observing that, all the prejudices you have, the biased views, the the positions you take, the things you think you are, the projections that you have about others. All these things are, well, if you really pay attention in your wisdom, you're seeing them in terms of what they really are, as conditioned phenomena arising and ceasing, because they have nothing to sustain them. They begin and end. And what remains, if you begin to really sense and trust in the refuge, is this knowing, this awareness, wisdom. Buddha knows the Dhamma. Buddha knows the truth of the way it is. I'm not saying I'm the Buddha. I mean, that's another personality view, isn't it? Around saying I am the Buddha. That is a sure sign of madness. So to put it in a more palatable way, say take refuge in the Buddha, because we're not putting ourselves into we're not the I am, even though I am the Buddha is a valid statement. If it's still coming from personality view, then it's a form of madness. So you can see why I keep encouraging you to trust in this awakened state, this attentive state. I hope you're all in. So then, in the present moment, is the posture, the grounding, the touching the earth, using the body, the physical body, that this body that we have to live with for our lifetime. So we're using this, but it's a helpful thing. It's something that can help us. If we look at it in the right way, we look at it in a personal way, then we suffer a lot from the body. Can any of us be as good looking as we would like to be, or can we, getting old and hair falls out or turns gray or something, and vanity is a very cruel thing, isn't it? When you identify with your body and you look into the mirror and your critical mind goes off. Nose too big, eyes too small. Too fat, too thin. That's mean-heartedness, isn't it? You're just criticizing and finding fault with this body. Looking at it just because you're comparing it maybe to a picture in a magazine of what a perfect man or woman should look like. So it's a kind of cruelty, self-abuse, vanity. I consider it like abusing yourself. But wise reflection isn't cruel, isn't it? It's not demanding your body be anything, or feeling that somehow that you're inferior because your body isn't as good as someone else's, or isn't as attractive, or whatever. But it's beginning to recognize the opportunity how to use this body for mindfulness, for developing wisdom. So touching the earth, being aware of just what it is to have a body, the weight of it, the qualities of a physical form, a sensual form, a form that feels everything. Now this is the experience of feeling. Sensitivity implies it's a pleasure, pain, neutral feeling. This is natural to this form. This is a sense realm we live in. We're born into a sense realm, sensitive realm, feeling realm. This is the way it is. So we're in this sensitive, with this sensitive form. What can we learn from it? And so then we're beginning to contemplate it in terms of experience rather than in terms of it being personal. So it's like this, the four postures, the Vedana, the feeling of it, the sense experiences through sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, the mental states, the memory, retentive, with being able to remember, have memories, language, thought, emotion, all around, put into this category of the five khandhas, or five aggregates, helps to contemplate the experience of namarupa, body and mind. So there's this relationship. Buddha knows the Dhamma. So this direct knowing, when you're in the state of pure attention, and what you're aware of, and wisdom from Buddha knows the way it is, the Dhamma. And the way it is all conditions are impermanent. Sape sankhara anicca. Which is not a statement about that somehow conditions are not worth anything because they're impermanent. Because some of the people that practice Buddhism think, well, it's just impermanent. Conditioned phenomena is, there's a kind of spurious logic they use, and because it's impermanent, it's not worth anything. But it's not a value judgment saying conditioned phenomena is impermanent, not making a statement about the quality or value of any condition, but it's just noting the way it is. If you can find a condition that's permanent, tell me. This sound of silence, the nada sound, helps it's where you get to the edge, where it's like you're suddenly kind of in the state of this receptive openness. You can't get beyond that. It's like you reach the eye of the storm, or the center, the still point, the center of being. So then thought whirls you out of that center. You get caught into your thoughts and emotions, and you're kind of back into the wheels. But as soon as you realize you're whirling around again on the wheel, and you can train yourself to go back to the center, to the still point of pure awareness. Or like the eye of the storm, isn't it? The eye of the storm, in the middle of a storm, if you're in the eye of the storm, it's still. All this incredible fury going on around you, but if you if you find the eye of the storm, you're safe because you're not caught in the momentum and power of the changing forces. Another image that really meant a lot to me over the years is a kind of Mahayana image of a lotus in the midst of it that blooms in the midst of the inferno is indestructible. And imagine this delicate lotus flower, beautiful lotus flower, in the middle of this thing, blazing inferno is indestructible. The power of an inferno is terrifying, isn't it? A lotus is a very delicate thing, isn't it? It's not easily, lotus flowers are easily destroyed. But the lotus in Buddhism always stands for purity. So you see like Buddha images always sitting on lotus thrones, and the lotus is a symbol for purity. So in that still point, that still center, it's pure. That's purity. If you want to know what purity is, that's it. You don't have. It isn't something that you don't have. No matter how impure your thoughts might be, yeah, purity is never stained by anything you think or do. It's always present. So, and contemplate this. I remember years ago when I became a monk, trying to always become pure through the keeping the rules and trying to control my thoughts and becoming a really good monk. And no matter how strict I was with the Vinaya and how good I tried to be, I never felt pure. So purity seemed far away from me. It just seemed so remote a possibility because I was looking at purity as something that I didn't have, and that I had to get it through being, fitting into the ideas I had of what a good monk should be. I had this feeling that no matter how hard I try, I never feel pure. Because that's coming from personality view, isn't it? The view I'm impure and I've got to become pure is personality view. So then changing from that, recognizing the hopeless trap of personality view, gave it up, trying to be believing in my personality views, and contemplated this state of, when I'm in this silent point, there's no self. It's beyond the conditioning, beyond the person, beyond the thought or the emotion. It embraces it. It's not like transcendent in a way of being high above and beyond all those gross things in the world. It's not like that. It embraces. It has this sense of being a still point, a tiny point that encompasses everything. It's like a paradox. That's what intuition is, like a still point, invisible point that encompasses everything. And so then I began to realize this is purity. This state, when I'm in this, when I relax into this awareness, that's pure, and I trust in that purity isn't something that comes and goes. Whether I'm aware of it or not, that's something else. But it's also very important to realize that that's your true nature. So you do have a real refuge that you can depend on to reflect all the kind of fears and desires and acquired habits that you have as a personality. It's intelligent. When you know, it's intelligent. It's not like having a PhD, not IQ, but it's a pure intelligence. It's alert. It's clear. The mind is. You feel this mental clarity and the ability to discern all conditions are impermanent and to discern the conditions and the unconditioned. So the human entity that we are, each one of us is a point in the universe it's on the where you're on the edge between the conditioned and the unconditioned. That's why in this human state you can actually know conditions this way, unconditioned is like this. So this is why the human birth is considered a fortunate one. Ajahn Sumedho used to say, being born as a human being is very fortunate. And when I first went there, I felt I was so cynical. I thought being born as a human being was a bad joke. I couldn't believe in God anymore. He's a joker. This is a joke. And not a funny one. But then they pointing to this, and like Luang Por Chah saying that this is a fortunate thing. You realize it is that each one of us has this good fortune now to reflect, to learn, to understand. We're not just helpless victims caught in a universal system that just terrifies us, and they're kind of trying to survive somehow as best we can in the jungle. So this direct knowing, discernment between suffering and non-suffering, self and not self, attachment and non-attachment. You have words like nibbana in Buddhism. And yesterday, talking to the staff, and they're asking me, why do nobody ever talks about nibbana? And I've been criticized in Thailand for talking too much about nibbana. A woman in Bangkok managed to tell me, you talk too much about nibbana, shouldn't. But I'm interested in nibbana. That's the whole point of being a monk, is to realize nibbana. But it's one of those words that is easily, like it's become a kind of high state in the minds of, in Thailand, it's for most Thai people in a Buddhist country like Thailand, Nibbana is very high, you know, a realization of that's very high and very kind of difficult and remote from most people. And then teachers like Luang Por Cha or Ajahn Buddhanathan, they were bringing onto what it really means in scriptural, just in scriptural references, is it means realization of non-attachment. It's not a kind of a state you attain through a lot of practice. Where it's used a lot, isn't it, as a, you know, they talk about nirvana as a kind of paradise. I was really in nirvana. They use it for, I wonder why they haven't used it for perfume or something. There's samsara. Yeah. I've seen samsara advertised as perfume. There's a rock group up in Seattle called Nirvana. But what it really means, referred to in the Pali Canon, it's the means in the realization of non-attachment. So this kind of knowledge knows attachment and non-attachment. So the direct knowledge, direct and wisdom is to know the difference. It doesn't do any good to go around saying you shouldn't be attached to anything and then feeling guilty and hopeless because you think of yourself as really being attached to everything and your grandchildren and everything. I can't really ever hope to get anywhere in this life because I love my children. So that is, you know, if that's what you know, if you don't question that, what do you really mean? What is the direct knowing in this case? Is that is a feeling, a thought that maybe you're attached to. You're attached to the thought of I'm attached to my grandchildren. Or do you know the difference between love and attachment? Because some people don't know the difference. They think love and attachment are the same thing. So because you love your grandchildren, you think you're attached to them. But are they the same thing? And so then, if you really love your grandchildren, you don't attach to them. When you're attached to your grandchildren, attachment always implies ignorance, and that comes out of, you know, ignorance and then selfish interest. So you say, I love my grandchildren, but you really want your grandchildren to obey you and do what you want, and you need them for your own emotional happiness, and you use them, exploit them. That's attachment. That's not love, is it? That's attachment. I need you for my well-being kind of thing. But love has no conditions on it. That loving doesn't, you know, it doesn't make demands. You say, I love you only if you obey me. That's not love, is it? That's blackmail. Contemplate this in the state of attentive awareness. You begin to contemplate, what do you mean by words like love, attachment, liking or disliking? So you even begin to think more clearly, more precisely, rather than just thinking habitually, because thinking becomes just a habit for us. The English language, if it's your native tongue, just becomes we think we understand it because we're habituated to thinking and speaking in English, but sometimes we don't even know what we're saying or how to use the words correctly. So words like love can mean almost anything, from to lust, to greed, to attachment, liking or whatever, or the unconditioned love. So the discerning ability, the Buddha knows the Dhamma, the knowing, is this discernment is to know the conditioned and the unconditioned, the created, the uncreated, the compounded, the uncompounded, the death-bound condition, the deathless reality, the path and not the path, suffering and not suffering, self and not self. This is wisdom. And this is something that you don't acquire, something you use through reflecting, through observing, through paying attention in the present. So I think this is a chance to ask questions during this period. If you have any questions, which probably none of you have. Yes? Well, it's where you just experiment, see what is useful. Like I found the nodded tone more useful in terms of giving a kind of expansive awareness and calm, where I can also, in that, gives a space and in which to investigate, like self and non-self, and where you can actually kind of observe what self really is as an experience, rather than you thinking that you're a self, or kind of as an ongoing thing, and where you begin to see when there's silence, there's attention, there's mindfulness, there's no self. Then when you start thinking about what I like, don't like, then you realize there's a self arising. So you're able to get a clear view of what is self, what is non-self, and that gives you a confidence to develop. You see the suffering from being a self all the time. Then your path is very clear. That this is the path, non-self, because there's no suffering here. And when I become somebody again, then I start suffering. There's no point in suffering if there's a way out of it. Yes? Well, with the pressures of these examinations, she'd get wound up into the feeling very stressed, and understandably so, because it's a very demanding thing, medical school, and where a lot of medical students would take to drink, she tells me, as a way of letting, of releasing these tensions. She wasn't into that drinking, so she was able to, just by meditating, learning to meditate every day and to relax into that silence, and let go of these, because in that silence you can actually let go of the worries, the anxiety about these examinations. You're actually kind of embracing these feelings, so that you're not just trying to get rid of them or being caught in them. And that gave her a balance to be able to study and do the necessary things to pass examinations, and balance that out with a skillful meditation where she didn't have to take to drink to relax, where she could begin to understand herself even better, see where she, how she creates tension and anxiety, and how these things do not help you to pass examinations. you can become paralyzed, so that you. And I've seen this happen. I remember when I first went to London. There was a Thai woman, Thai student doing a PhD in London at the University of London, and she got herself in such a tense state she couldn't do anything. She is just rigid with tension. She couldn't study, and she was just so anxious and caught in this terrible anxiety that she didn't know what to do. So I taught her meditation, and then she found that helpful. So when she got her PhD, she dedicated her thesis to me. I'm quite flattered by that. But I mean, it was just like she was, and I can understand her. I was in graduate school. I was a nervous wreck. I mean, I wish I knew how to meditate when I was in university.
I guess my question comes out of, I practiced in another tradition for a number of years, Surat Shabd Yoga, and the Shabd is the sound. And in that tradition, the sound comes of its own accord, so you don't really have much control. In fact, if you try very hard, then that's not really the way. And so I was wondering, whether there was really a way to cultivate it, or if it just comes of its own, in your experience.
Well, it's a matter of pointing it out. Like people hear it, but they don't generally know what it is. So it's not all that mysterious. But if you think, the thing with that kind of thinking is that you tend to think it's very kind of remote, and see it as a kind of something that will happen. So you probably miss it, because you're attached to maybe a view about it. Or it's like people have told me that the sound that they're hearing, they don't probably think that's the sound I'm talking about. Because you tend to see yourself it maybe as not good enough, or it's too obvious. So and you're used to seeing yourself maybe in ways of being not holy enough, or not good enough for that, and that you have to keep trying to be better, and eventually this will come to you, and then you'll be okay. Because that's based on a sense of self. Still, the sense of self is influencing it. But like I became aware of this. Well, I remember when I was 19 years old, I was in the Navy, and I'm not a military type person, so I was very unhappy, and was miserable, in fact. And so I went for a weekend to an Episcopalian monastery in Santa Barbara. Because I was brought up in the Episcopal Church, and these monks used to come to Seattle every year, and they'd stay at our house. I knew these Anglican monks, and I went there. There's a beautiful place in the hills near the Pacific Ocean, Santa Barbara, and I was walking on a Sunday afternoon out in the sunshine, out in the hills, and suddenly all this angst and anxiety and misery dropped, just like that, just disappeared. Self-consciousness disappeared, and there's this ringing sound. it's just like it's such a beautiful experience, you know, because before I was caught in this incredible kind of miserable state, and at 19, you know, it's a difficult age for a man. So you're really, you know, you're in a lot of anxiety anyway, and then being in the U.S. Navy was no help. So and then suddenly it just dropped like that. And so I was in this state of bliss, and I could hear this kind of ringing. I thought it was the sound of insects or something, you know, in the sunny afternoon. But what I did notice was the self was gone, and that was bliss, to not be anything, not be anybody. And so I thought then, oh, I'd like to be like this all the time. And I went back to the naval base that evening in San Diego, and all the self things kept coming back, but I didn't know what had happened. But I didn't know what it was. I wasn't on drugs or anything. And even though it was in a Christian monastery, it wasn't connected with Christianity. So then 2 years later, I came across Buddhism, and figured it out, that I probably was experiencing no self, you know. So, you know, that's one reason why I became quite enthusiastic on Buddhism after that, because something in me resonated with that teaching. Then when I was a novice in Nong Khai the first year, I noticed that. Well, after that, I didn't hear that sound anymore. After, you know, for years, till I started meditating in Nong Khai as a samanera, a novice, and then I began to notice that when I got over the initial kind of restlessness and that I had in the beginning, and I was calm, I began to hear this ringing sound, and so I started realize that if I'd stay with that sound, I'd feel calm. And so I started using it for that, just for calming the mind. And then one day I had to renew my visa. So I'd been in this for months, this place, you know, all alone really, without much contact with anybody. I was in a state of very kind of, what do you call it, super sensitivity. I was incredibly sensitive by this time, so that I just could feel everything, subtle things that I ordinarily wouldn't feel. So, and I had to walk from the monastery, which was several miles, to the immigration post. And during that walk, I walked through the town of Nong Khai, and I could see everybody. I could see the storekeepers, or the Chinese shopkeepers. I could see the suffering in their faces. I could pick up on so much that I'd never really noticed in my ordinary state of mind. And I was in such a hyper state of sensitivity. When I went into the immigration office, I felt like there's this incredible wall of aversion to me. And I realized, I didn't know then what it was, but the head monk of that province had pressured the immigration to extend my visa. And they were angry about it. So I didn't know this, you see. So I walked in, and then because of my state of super sensitive, I just felt this like a big wave, tidal wave of anger and aversion, even though nobody did anything. They kind of, but there was, I could have put up with that in a less sensitive state, but this was like really kind of shattered this, it really upset me. Felt very upset by it. I went back very upset to the monastery, and then it took me a while to get back into the state of calm again. But and then in London, when I went to London in '77, I remember the first year in London was difficult because there was a lot of when I accepted the invitation to go to England, I didn't know what I was getting into. When I got there, and I realized all the problems of this group that invited me. And there was, in the council of the trustees of this English Sangha Trust, there was a war going on. and suddenly I was in the middle of this battlefield. And the meetings they used to have, the tempers were flying and accusations were being made. And I'd been a monk for all these years, and this is exactly what I didn't want. One way to become a monk was to get out of meetings like that. So I kept thinking of, aversion to this place, a lot of aversion to it. And then I remembered the nada sound, so I started using that. And it was like I was walking down, it was in northwest London, in Hampstead, which is the northwest part of London. It's on a hill. I was walking down this hill, and suddenly this nada sound just came at me out of thin air, and just kind of, I'd forgotten all about it. And suddenly it just like it was saying, remember me. Oh yes. And so then I began to use this in these meetings with all this acrimony going on. I could stay centered in myself through resting in this sound. And I could take in what was going on. It wasn't like I was shutting myself off, but I was not wobbling in aversion to the things that were being said. That was quite amazing. As I realized how to deal with a situation that before I didn't know how to cope with those kind of scenes very well. So just learning from it. Now it's like and then applying it in terms of Dhamma practice. Of use it as investigation because it gives you perspective. Using that as a kind of like the unconditioned, because it has this unconditioned quality to it. It's expansive. It has immeasurable. It's here and now, and it doesn't cut you off from anything. It's embracing the moment, so that, like now I can hear the nada sound and still be talking. So it's like space, It's not like if I do anapanasati, right now I have to forget you. So I mean, because that's a conditioned thing, the breath. So the nod is like a kind of entry point into the unconditioned. That's how I've used it, and it works very well that way, because then you begin to recognize. You can actually investigate, like I was saying to this woman here about self and non-self, and suffering and non-suffering, and attachment and non-attachment. So you begin, then your wisdom faculty starts being activated. Because that's what Buddha wisdom really is about, is this discernment that we can do within the human perspective. Because we're on the edge between the conditioned and the unconditioned, and that's one image I found. Like in T.S. Eliot's poem, to apprehend the points of interest of the time with the time, intersection of the time with the timeless is the occupation for the saint. I mean, it's like the point of intersection of the of time with the timeless. It's like in the human, this mindfulness in the moment, like the intersection where time and the timeless intersect. So you can look at this, at the time-bound things like your thoughts, feelings, sensory experiences. You see them as anicca, dukkha, anatta. You know, you're looking at the time and then the timeless. So it's like this. It's the point of intersection, this human present moment. And it's like the Buddha is at that point of intersection and can discern the time and the timeless, conditioned, unconditioned, self and non-self, suffering and non-suffering, grasping and non-grasping. So if you contemplate like that, then you really you're cultivating the wisdom faculty. So then you naturally see, well, no self, no suffering, unconditioned, nibbana. All these are non-grasping. You realize this is the path, here and now. And you really know this. It's a very clear path. It's not just a kind of abstract idea that you hope someday you might find if you're lucky. But it's very precise and real. And then you can see the conditioned realm and accept the conditioned realm for what it is without being aligned with it or bound into it. So you can't operate within the conditioned realm with the society and your family and so forth. It's not like, I'm going to Nibbana, goodbye. Goodbye, cruel world. I'm fed up with you. And even though you feel like that sometimes, but that's still the self. You know, if I hate the world, that's the creation of myself again into the world. So it's not a matter of despising the world or the conditioned realm, but knowing it for what it is. So you're not just being stuck and bound into an endless circular motion of samsara. Like the word samsara in Pali means this endless cycle. Like if you look at the way you're thinking, you just go around and around with conditions. One thought goes on to another thought, and it just goes on and on and on. So the samsara is like endless cycles. They just keep going around and around and around and around. Nibbana is where you let go of the cycles. You're not getting rid of the cycles. You're not like smashing them and demolishing them, but you're letting go. You're letting the cycles still cycle, but you're not attached. You're in that still center. And that's where you belong. And you'll find that's your natural home. Well, how many of you really feel at home here as a personality, as a human being? And ask yourself. I don't. I've never felt at home as a person, or that I belonged anywhere. But in the silence, then it's a natural state where I feel at ease and at home there. It's not like a cultivated, refined state that holds me, that I have to hold on to, but it's a natural state of being that I can forget and then be wandering around in the cycles again. Yes?
there's only anatta, anicca, dukkha as right view, and any other view, any other thing that occurs that doesn't have those three views is not right view, and it's just an idea about right view. In other words, for wisdom, once you start seeing that, you see the world, you start seeing that. Does wisdom express itself through your thoughts? You have to see to see anicca and dukkha. You have thoughts about it too, don't you?
Well, that's the thing with those are called the three characteristics of existence. So that those three characteristics are common to all conditions, or all that exists. Like existence means that what arises and ceases. What exists is what arises and ceases. So the say that they're like those words, anicca, dukkha, anatta, are pointing to say the changingness or transiency, impermanence, and unsatisfactoriness and non-self. So that this is then for you to contemplate that is rather than grasp the idea of anicca, dukkha, anatta. So like some people do grasp the idea, they'll grasp the idea that everything is impermanent, and they think that they really are, that's wisdom, that they believe everything is impermanent, where actually they're grasping the idea of impermanence rather than using the concept of impermanence to remind them to contemplate impermanence. You see, so what the Buddha is asking us to do is to develop this kind of intuitive attentiveness to the way things are, which is not a view in itself. It's not like right view is that right view is that everything is impermanent, but the everything is impermanent is a kind of pointing, is an encouragement for you to contemplate impermanence. Then right view is much more like a profound understanding of impermanence that comes through your own observation of it, rather than through grasping the idea of it. Because a lot of people just grasp Buddhist ideas, and then it becomes just kind of, they'll just use everything's impermanent. There's a kind of dismissal of life. They use it as a way of dismissing experience. It's all suffering. They'll say, remember somebody said, I remember commenting on the beautiful flowers, and they said, well, they're only going to fade and wither. They're impermanent. And that was a kind of depressing way to look at life. I think, is that what Buddha wanted us to do? Just saying, look at the flowers. They're only going to get old and wither and rot and stink. Is that contemplating impermanence, or are you just taking a position? Or is the the beauty of flowers is still beautiful? But if I ask those flowers to be beautiful for me, and then when they don't, then they start fading, then I get upset because I made a demand on them that they can't fulfill. So, but in contemplating impermanence means that you're accepting the totality of something, the whole cycle. So they, like the flowers at their peak moment, at their most beautiful, and you can rejoice in the beauty of something without grasping it. And the Blake poem, he who binds to himself a joy doth the winged life destroy. But he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. So that's been another thing to remind myself, kissing the joy as it flies, to not hold on to happiness or beauty or anything like that, not try to own things or hold them and keep them, because when you bind to yourself a joy, you kill it. You kill what you love. You destroy joy by trying to hold on to it. So the only way that the joy comes is through kissing the joy as it flies. You're letting it go. You're not demanding it be yours. And then because in the holy life there's a lot of joy in it. It's not just thinking everything's impermanent and everything is suffering and there's no self. And somebody said, look at the beautiful flower, they're only going to fade. That's a real killjoy, isn't it? Yes?
I'm interested in your ordination of the bhikkhuni. I'm just wondering what is your intention as far as re-establishing the lineage, say as comparing to the Buddhist time, or is this going to be another Meiji situation as the time?
Well, you can't. There's no way you can. In the Theravada, that they'll let you establish bhikkhuni order. So like Sister Suna is not bhikkhuni, but they're like 10 precepts, like samaneri, and so that they're on 10 precepts. And then we've developed a training discipline around that, like based on a lot of the bhikkhuni vinaya, but it's more. It's not. We can't call them bhikkhunis, because in Theravada Buddhism, there's a strong reaction to that you can't establish bhikkhuni order. That only a Buddha can do it. But there are various opinions about establishing bhikkhuni order in Theravada, because in the Mahayana school, especially Chinese Mahayana, there's bhikkhuni orders that trace their lineage back to Sri Lanka, in fact, to bhikkhuni ordination in Sri Lanka. So you can even make a case of apostolic succession or of continuity of lineage through bhikkhuni order, through Mahayana. But I personally don't have the. I'm not particularly concerned on that level. I'm mainly interested in providing ways of developing mindfulness and helping people to develop an enlightened mind. So I'm not into kind of being a pioneer for a bhikkhuni order, but I've certainly, in England we've tried to present forms that are more useful for the women who take on the monastic life, because like the Mechi or the Thai nun, that works in a situation like in Thailand, but so it's part of a whole cultural quality there that it tends to work within that cultural setting, but it doesn't work so well in the democratically oriented Western countries. So it's this is an ongoing problem actually on level of tradition. So my attitude is one of just doing the best I can with it. But the main emphasis is on, rather than on the external convention so much as on the internal practice. So that let's encourage that, using what we have for mindfulness, and rather than trying to make everything what everyone wants it to be, which is, an impossibility. I don't know how much, how successful it will be. Time will tell. Yes?
What makes this practice a religion for you, as opposed to just a technique? Last night, Sister Sundara, speaking about in Thai, has a very simple view of there's skillful thinking and there's unskillful thinking, and I wonder where it goes. It makes the leap from simply being a technique that we practice over several days, we can develop this, and then goes into the realm of metaphysical and opening the gates to the deathless and all that. Where does it become a religion for you?
Well, to me, a religion, the word religion comes from the Latin root religio, which means a bond. So it's like a binding of some sort. So it's a religion is a vehicle that points to the deathless reality. So it used to be, like in the West, we think of religion as believing in God. So that, Christians oftentimes think Buddhism is not a religion because we don't have a concept of God. So that they think we're not a religion, we're a humanistic philosophy. I've heard that from many people. But that's just because religion in Europe and America has mainly been through believing in a deity, in a God, in a creator God, in having a theology and so forth, a metaphysical, a highly developed metaphysical doctrine. And yet the Buddha approached the religious question from almost the opposite end of the Judeo-Christian one, which is one is starting at the top, the Buddha started at the bottom. This is how I see it. To be a Christian, you have to believe in God. And in Buddhism, you say there is suffering. So suffering isn't a belief. You don't believe in suffering because suffering is a common experience that we all have. So it's not a matter of. So it's not a metaphysical truth. It's a noble truth. Suffering is a noble truth, and it's the most common experience we all share, whether rich or poor, male or female, whatever race, nationality. It's a common, from at the time of the Buddha to the present day, suffering is the same thing. We suffer in the same ways. So the noble truth is through understanding suffering, which takes you to a metaphysical realization, which is the deathless. And so it's the Buddha approached the religious path through an existential truth, a reality that we can all recognize easily, and through pursuing that with wisdom, we realize the deathless reality. So, in terms of like God in Buddhism would be Dharma, and God in Christianity has become a patriarchal figure. So you've got endless problems in Christianity with God, because God is defined in gender and it has characteristics where, say, Dhamma is, you can't make an image of Dhamma. You make a symbol like a wheel, Dhammajaka, but you can't make a human figure and call that Dhamma. Buddha can be a figure, human figure, because a Buddha can, then take human form. But ultimate reality is formless. There's no. You don't want to give it a form. You don't want to make it male or female or red or blue or anything else. So in this way, Buddhism doesn't have this problem in regards to ultimate reality. So for me, the religious pursuit is this realization of this unconditioned, and so so this realization is the Buddha teachings are pointing to that reality. But oftentimes one grasps the teaching and never sees the reality, like the finger pointing at the moon. The Zen image of pointing to the moon, and you look at the finger, you never see the moon. Or if you just look at the scriptures, you'll probably never see the Dhamma. So you need to recognize the scriptures, the tradition, the Dhamma Vinaya as it is in scriptural form and in tradition are pointing at that reality, rather than that we grasp these scriptures as the reality itself. You see, so and this is where, like in England, the intermonastic dialogue, you talk to Catholic monks and nuns, and about this, and they agree. When you get into mystical side of Christianity, you realize that you have to let go of your patriarchal figure of God. And I remember going to a Cistercian monastery up in Scotland for a weekend, and they had in their library they had all these books by Thomas Merton, and they were all really glad to have 3 Buddhist monks come and spend a weekend. We had long discussions on practice, but then the real problems came when it came to the subject of God. And then you could see that some of the Catholic monks, they couldn't understand how we could live a holy life without a personal relationship with God. And this is what the emphasis of this kind of personal dialogue with God in your mind or in your practice. And so they felt, because we didn't do that it couldn't be the same thing. There's this great doubt. Because so much emphasis, so much importance is placed on God as a patriarch, as a supreme being. And so this was one of the problems they had, because it's very difficult once you've elevated God to such a high place to let go of it. You see, so in terms of, that's what, like in Dhamma practice, what I'm trying to do here is to not place enlightenment and realization of Nibbana as an attainment that's way up there, because if I give that impression, then you'll see yourself always as not being able to do that because it's too high. But if you begin to trust yourself in an awakened awareness in the present, which is not asking you to do something impossible. It's not too high for anybody. It takes a certain determination and willingness to do that, but it's not asking you to do something that is too refined or too subtle or too much for anybody. And through that middle way, then you realize this ultimate truth, the deathless reality. But you have to let go of all your views and opinions about it, and learn to just trust in the simple act of awareness, simple state of pure attention.
The question I have is how do you get away with what you classified as annoying, but I'll put behavior after the end of it? You know, my conditioning that doesn't seem to go away. For instance, in sitting and meditating, where I can stay on the breath for a few minutes and then I'm gone, or in speech with other people in the normal day-to-day activities. I'd like to use skillful speech, but it doesn't always happen.
Well, it takes time. Or mindfulness, anyway. Right speech was one of the most difficult ones for me, actually. But because speech kind of comes out so quickly before you even, then you can be saying things before you realize what you're saying. So, but it does. After a while, you become, as you keep cultivating this path, you develop more confidence. And then sometimes you do think you're not getting anywhere, but you can't believe those kind of emotions. You know, like, because emotionally you're programmed for worldly things. Like your emotional habits are around the sense of yourself as a person, about attainments and achievements, about successes and failures, and about your whether you're an important person or not important person, and acceptance and rejection. So I mean, there's all the emotional habits are conditioned for worldly experience, and now you say the worldly experience. You're doing the opposite. You're letting go of the world. So emotionally, that can be very threatening. You can feel, I'm going to dissolve into nothing, or this is useless, or what's this about, or if I just let go of everything, I'll disappear into a void of nothingness. Is what it seems like to oftentimes emotionally, because it seems like all the things that make you a person are important. You know, that I am this. This is my identity, and these are important for me to hold on to this. And that's emotional. But as you begin to give less importance to those emotions, not just to dismiss them but to recognize that they are conditions, and you're no longer believing in them, and so willing to trust what your emotions tell you, because now you're developing your wisdom faculty. So and the wisdom faculty isn't from emotional habits, but it's a direct knowing things as they are. So this is why I emphasize trusting your ability to pay attention and to observe, and to even see your own doubts about your own progress, or your inability to be mindful enough, or your lack of ability to use right speech. These are all perceptions that come and go around the self, you know. So you can begin to even use those kind of doubts and reservations as mental objects that you can begin to recognize with wisdom, rather than being caught up in believing them. Yes?
I need a little clarity around mind so I can stop thinking about it. I understand mind to be a faculty, but then you said the body's in the mind, and I come from also this New Age culture where there's a universal mind, and so mind has many different connotations to me, and I'm really unclear about what you're referring to. If it's a faculty, how can the body be in it? And is there like a higher mind, or just the one that's here? Could you speak to that, please?
Well, we want to grasp a perception of ultimate reality, but so I mean, but the Buddha actually seemed to avoid things like higher mind and like in Hinduism, you have the big self and the little self and the Atman and so forth. And the Buddha seemed to not want to use those kind of terms. So he actually presents no kind of metaphysical speculations. Like Hinduism is a very metaphysical approach to, to talking about the ultimate and the absolute and the big self and the overmind and universal consciousness, things like this. The Buddha never in one scripture he did point to the what he called the Vinyanang Anidasanang Anantang Sappado Pabang, which is consciousness that is unlimited and deathless and radiant. But there's only one reference in the whole scripture. And so people grasp that. But the value I've found through the Buddhist approach is just seeing that very desire to have a concept, to apply to ultimate realization. Where Buddha was using it more through like non-grasping, like Nibbana means non-grasping, non-self. And it tends towards, logically towards a kind of annihilationism. But in terms of, but we're not approaching it logically anymore, but intuitively. When you let go of everything, including the desire to know about the true nature of mind and what it's called, then what's left? And this is why I keep pointing to this trusting yourself to realize that, not your ego. Because like just in any moment, like when I let go of everything, what's left is a pure state of attention and intelligence. It's not personal anymore. It's not mine. And I began and as I see that more and more and reflect on it, then I don't need to have a name for anything anymore. It's like knowing without perception. It's a direct, intuitive knowing without perceiving it in any way, and that is the ultimate act of faith, really, where it's like jumping into the abyss, into the black hole, which are images of where you're going into the total unknown without any map. And like an abyss is like, it's dark and frightening. But just because of your faith and trust, you're willing to throw yourself in. What happens? And so these are the conundrums of the holy life. And the like in the crucifixion, that a scene where like I use that as an example, a Christian example of where the Christ is nailed to a cross, subjected to torture and humiliation. These are the things we're most frightened of. Stripped naked, made fun of, and tortured, and then the forgiveness. He says, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Then he says this strange thing about the cry of, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? That even, not only is he being rejected, tortured, humiliated from above, but God deserts him. And then the surrender. So the kind of surrender in the midst of total desolation and loss. I mean, that's a really harsh image. But in terms of I mean, that seems to be slightly extreme, in terms of it oftentimes interpreted a historical act by the Christians. But in terms of a historical event by the Christians, but in terms of spiritual development, what I call is that more and more, as you see through the pain and the suffering of your attachments and the body, the identity with your body, with your emotional habits and thoughts, and when you really see the suffering caused through attaching, then it becomes, your faith in this path becomes very clear, and you realize that this path is here and now, it's ever present, it's deathless, timeless, it's realizable before you die, and it's always, no matter what happens, no matter how much you get tortured, abused, humiliated, and deserted and betrayed, it's always here. So I mean that. but that for you to know that rather than believe in some kind of deathless reality as an abstract idea, that doesn't work. And then you need more like maybe to personify that as some kind of holy figure that loves you and that gives you a... But then even with Jesus, that deserted him on the cross. That belief in a holy divine Father that loves me, that deserted him at that moment. That image was lost. But then the act of faith was in surrender, and to the suffering of the cross. So in terms of just our own practice, I just apply that in new ways. I hope I don't have to be crucified or experience such a miserable thing in my life, but if I can deal with just the ordinary irritations of monastic life in that way, I mean, I don't want to be put up on a cross. But how well do I do in just daily life in the monastery? Can I forgive people for they know not what they do? Am I any good at that? Can I just let go and surrender to the moment rather than hope that somebody's going to come along and save the day? Or expect intervention from outside. I need, something out there to come and help me through this. How much is just surrender and just trust in the simple act of awareness in the present, no matter what the pressures and the demands of a community can be, or the little frustrating irritations that every part of human experience. So I decided to work with these things, because these are more real for me than waiting until the big moment when somebody decides to crucify me, which is very unlikely to happen.